Welcome everyone, my name is Tim Burris, and today I want to talk about using tag helpers to reduce the amount of HTML that you copy and paste. Here we're looking at a typical web application where I've defined a detail view, so this would be read-only presentation of the data elements. So we have these fields and we're kind of going with this label above and then the value here. And so for each one of these fields we're going to duplicate the HTML, and the HTML for a page like this would look like this, where each field is represented by an outer div, an inner div, and then the actual field. So this block is for one field, and then we'll have to copy and paste that or type it, however, throughout for every single one of the fields. And additionally, we'll have something similar for our edit page. So here's our edit page. Again, we have the fields, and we're using floating labels from Bootstrap for this. And when we look at the actual HTML for this, again, we're going to see the same thing, but actually a little more verbose because we're going to have our form group, we're going to have our floating div with our input and our label, and then we're also going to have our validation HTML here. And so for each field that we want to represent, this is pretty much the block of code, and a lot of times I'm just going to copy and paste this and then just go through and fix all the names. But by using tag helpers, we can represent each field with just a single line. So here we can see we have our display field tag helper. So this is all we need for each field, is just one display field, and that will produce this entire block of HTML. And similarly for the edit, where an entire block was this, now the entire block is simply this one line. And so overall, you can see this is just two of those cards that we saw on the display, the job and the extras card, and this is the original HTML, and this is how much it covers. So you can see by using a tag helper, we can definitely cut down on the amount of copy and paste. So let's do that. I'm going to start by writing the tag helper for the edit field. So what we want to do is be able to replace this entire block with something that looks like this. Of course, right now, this is not recognized because we have not written our tag helper yet, but we want this entire block to be replaced with this. Now, if you've never ever heard of a tag helper or used a tag helper, you might learn that you have been using tag helpers, you just didn't realize it. Microsoft provides a tag helper here. This ASP-4 is a tag helper that is used to take this expression and render out the ID and the name and some of the other elements that you use when you output an ASP field. Same thing for the label and this validation for. So these are tag helpers as well. They are simply, instead of generating an entire block of HTML, they're only generating some attributes that go on this individual input. So we're actually going to extend the existing tag helper to have it replace the input with all the HTML that we need. So let's go. We're going to start by, let's go ahead and just add a tag helpers folder. And we'll go ahead and create a class. And we will make this our float form input tag helper. And I'm going to show this side by side so that we can kind of see what we need to get to. Like I said, we're gonna start with Microsoft's tag helper. We can derive from just tag helper. And we could get started with writing it all from scratch, but because we want to take advantage of the existing ASP4 functionality and not rewrite that ourselves, we're actually going to use Microsoft's input tag helper. So that we have a starting point. And the first thing it's going to say is that we need a constructor that passes in an HTML generator, and that can just be injected in. So we'll just go here and we'll add our HTML generator, and we will pass this guy into the base. Now the key to a tag helper is overriding the process method. And so this is where we're actually going to do our work. And so while we're authoring this, keep in mind the tag helper by default, if we just left it as is going to render our input element. So that is what the output is going to be. If we change nothing, it will simply render this input. So with that in mind, everything that we're going to do is going to be based on whether we need to write HTML before that input or after that input. And so we'll go ahead and set up our output to produce the type of tag we want. Tag name, and so this is going to be input. Now we would want to write similar handlers for both the text area and for the select. And when we do those, for example, a text area has to have a closing tag, so you would need to do the tag mode and tell it that we want to render both a start and an end tag. So we can be explicit here and we can just say self-closing and make this an input, and that is the default, so we actually don't need this line, but sometimes it's nice to be pretty explicit. But we are going to render an input, and the tag mode is going to be a self-closing input. And by self-closing, what I mean is we're going to get input like that. If we were doing our text area, then we would want, we would want the closing tag as well. So that's what I mean by the self-closing versus open and close. So now that we know our output is going to produce an input, let's start writing out the things that come before our input. So we'll start at the top. This is the block that we are trying to generate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our output and we're going to say pre-element. So this is before our element, before our input. We want to write this first opening div. So I'm just going to, we're going to append HTML, and we'll put this guy in there. I'm going to move this over a little bit so we can see our actual code. And we're going to document this a little bit while we go so that it's easier to follow. So we're going to open our form group. And then we know at the end, so post element, so after our input, we are going to want to close that div. And so this will be close the form group. Now for fun, let's just go ahead and see how our HTML is coming along. We'll save this, but we'll notice that this guy is not highlighting. It still doesn't know what this means. And the reason is because we have not told our project yet that we want to include custom tag helpers. And we do that by going to our shared view imports, and I'm going to and you'll see here, this is how the Microsoft tag help, the ASP4, the ASP validation, this is how their tag helpers were included. And we're going to tell it to just include ours much the same way. And we'll just tell it to include our tag helpers. So our project is called Tag Helpers Demo. And now all the tag helpers that are in our project should be included. We'll come back here, still not seeing it. We'll recompile. And sometimes we may have to close and reopen. And sure enough, there we go. Okay, so now whenever we go to type, we'll see all of our tag helpers. Right now, we just have our one, but that's great. So now it understands that's our tag helper. So when we run this, and we go to our edit page, we will see our new tag, our new guy right here. We'll inspect him, and we should at least see the outer form group and the input, since that's all we've done. Sure enough. So our outer form group and then our input, and that's as far as we've gotten. So at least it's working as is. One more note, one great thing about tag helpers are, and we can see that happening right here, is any attributes that we declare in HTML will carry over automatically to the output. So you can see that we have not supported this label text yet. I have this attribute label text, which will be where we're writing the text of the label. But since we haven't added support in our tag helper, it's just another attribute. So any attributes we add here, we can add classes. Let's say that for this particular one, we wanted to make the text danger. Anything that we add on here will just automatically be carried over by our tag helper. So gotta recompile. And you'll see that our class was put on here, our data val. So any additional attributes that we include will automatically carry over. So that's just a side note. Let's go ahead and finish out what we need for this tag helper. We have written our outer group. Let's go ahead and write our floating div. So again, we're just going to take this guy, paste him in here. So this will be our open floating. And then of course, afterwards we are going to need to close our floating. So this will be closed floating. And again, automatically here in the middle, without us doing anything, because these are pre-elements and these are post-elements, our input is going to be rendered right here automatically. We don't do anything because Microsoft's tag helper is going to do that. But just putting this here for visual reference. So our input goes there. And that means we still need to render our label. We also need to render our validation. Now, for our label, which needs to come, you can see it comes after our input. There's an interesting thing here. We could go and, after our element, try to write out the HTML for the label. However, you can see that we want to take advantage of our model expression, our model binding here, to generate the ASP4. So we don't want to try to recreate all that by hand. Luckily, Microsoft has exposed all the code and generators available. So we can actually just, so we're just going to say render our label. And we can use the HTML generator, which we injected here. We passed it into the base. We could have grabbed a reference to it, but they also expose it on our base input tag helper. So we'll just use it right off of there. And now we can just tell it to go ahead and generate the label. And this will save us from having to try to parse out the ASP4 and figure all that stuff out. Now, to generate the label, they are going to require us to pass in some things like the view context, which again is available on the input tag helper, the model explorer. So that will come off of our 4. Again, looking at this is that ASP-4, so we can get the model explorer from there. We need the actual expression. So this will be the 4.name. Let's move this down so we can see. Next up is the label text, and this is where we can choose to override. So if you're familiar with ASP4, it'll generate the label text based on data annotations and those things, but you might choose to override that. For right now, we are going to just pass in null, and then we'll take care of that in just a moment. And then lastly, any, I believe it's HTML attributes, yeah. So any HTML attributes that we might want to add on there, which for now will be nothing. And in fact, I don't think we're going to add anything at all. Now, this will this generate will not actually output. It's actually just going to return it to us. So so this will generate us our label, just like the ASP4 label does. And then all we have to do is write it out. So append HTML and label. So again, we are using the post element. So this will be after the input. Write out the label, and let's take a look and make sure that we are still on track. All right, so looks like we have our validation, our form floating, our input label. I mean our input, our label, and you can see it did use the for. So it looks like things are going right along. Now it's not looking quite right yet. Let's see what might. Oh, you know what? So our input, I added a class text danger, but no one cares. What I've not done is decorate this as a form control, which for Bootstrap that's what we need, and that's just because I'm not doing a good job of paying attention to what I need to actually be outputting. If we look at this input, we need the form control attribute, class on there. The way we can handle that is, well, I mean, one way is here we could change this to be form control. Remember, this was just my testing out, but I don't really want to do that. What I'd love to do is to not have anything extra that's going to anything that we're going to copy and paste every single time. I want this handler to handle. This helper to handle. I'm going to, so this is what we want. What we can do is on our output, there's the option to add class. And so again, anything off of output is this base input. And so anything we do that's not pre or post element is going to impact this actual input. And so if we do add class, they're talking about CSS class here, we can add form control. Again, if you're not familiar with Bootstrap, this is a pretty common CSS class that you want to add to many of your inputs to give them that nice look and feel. And he's not happy. Oh, I think I have to tell it the encoder. Yeah, HTML encoder. HTML encoder. And we'll just use the default. Okay, so now our form control should be on there. Let's just real quick take a look. This should look a lot better, hopefully. Okay, yeah, so now our second one, job name. And you can see what we'd like for it to say is job space name. Instead, it says job name. And that's because we're just letting the ASP4 render the text that it wants. And I'm not using data annotations or anything like that. So what I'd really like to be able to do is, if you look on here, I'd like to be able to specify what the label text should be, because I'm not big on using the data annotations, but preference. If you use data annotations, you won't have to do any of this. But what I'd like to do is add this special attribute so that I can sort of pass data into this helper and then do things with it. So I'm just going to create a property string, and I'm just going to call it label text. And honestly, that's all you have to do. I'm going to give it a comment, optional text to override default label text. And so I create that, And remember here where we were passing in label text, now we will just pass in the label text that's there. Rebuild. And so immediately on rebuild, you see this lit up, and it now recognizes that label text is an option. So Microsoft is using some kind of parser on the back end to take Pascal cased properties and render them out like this. So label text becomes this, and IntelliSense does work here. So let's go label text, job name X. Let's do that so that we can tell the difference between that one and our original. Now let's say that you wanted it to say label text here, but you wanted to name your property differently. Like let's say we wanted this to be overriding, I don't know, overriding label text. And you know, now this guy is, when we rebuild this, it's not going to be happy because it thinks it should be called overriding, but that's not how we want it to show. One of the things we can do here is we can use an attribute name, and we can just override what it should be and have this say label text. And now when we rebuild, again, it's happy. So if we don't want to use Microsoft's kind of generator for creating the attribute name based on the property name, then you can just override it here. And we'll just go ahead and leave it like that. So now let's just make sure that all of this is working. And there we go. Job name X is now being printed in. All right, let's move along. So we have our label done utilizing Microsoft's generate label. I think the only piece left is the validation. That is, we have not written the validation yet. So that goes after the floating. So we'll come down here after floating. And we'll post element, append HTML. Well, this will be our, the IntelliSense suggested that we wanted a closing div. So I'll just go ahead and close my validation div. And now let's go ahead and open our validation div. And yeah, post element, append HTML, and let's see, what do we need? So first off, we just need this guy, and this is for Bootstrap again. Oh, I need the whole div. I don't know what I'm doing here in my life. Okay, so we have our validation div, and then in the middle we need to actually render our validation element. And again, we want to take advantage of Microsoft's ASP Validation 4 and not have to rewrite all that, which looks at the model state and decides, you know, is there an actual validation error? All that stuff we don't really want to have to handle. So just like our label, we can use our generator to generate our validation message. And again, we're going to need to pass in, let's make this a little bit bigger. These things again are Explorer. Our expression will still be our for.name. Let's see what's next. Oh, this will be the actual message. And next is the tag. Now we could actually do span, because that's what that's what actually gets rendered is a span. But alternatively, we can by inspecting the original code for the HTML input helper, we can see that Microsoft has this view context dot validation message element, and I guess this is probably because that's configurable somewhere, or you can override it so that all validation messages, instead of getting a span, maybe they get a div. So instead of us hard coding in span and then somewhere else in the pipeline it changing that, we're just going to use this property here to tell us what type of element to render, and then our last parameter will be our HTML attributes. Now I really have a difficult time writing this like this because what I really want to do is I want to name all of these, but I'm trying to save time and keep it on a screen here that we can all see. So this will generate our validation element. So validation element. And then all we have to do is output it. Man, the smart IntelliSense or the AI IntelliSense, whatever it is really getting great in Visual Studio. It pretty much, I don't even know why I type anything. I just hit tab and it does all the work. And so with that, I believe that we have everything that we need to replicate our original code. So we will hop in here, and we will take a gander here, and we'll expand this guy out and just make sure that they look the same. And we'll just look here. Looks like we have everything. Now, what I am noticing is that the val required, that we're missing some things here. So we're just missing the validation. And so I wonder if the reason that that is not being included is because we are duplicating the same field and Microsoft might be rendering this for only one. So you know how live demos go. Let's see if that's the case. I'm actually going to just strip this out and retry, and now we'll see if, since we're not rendering the same exact field twice, if we get the validation message attributes that we would expect. So now we only have one job name. Let's check this guy out, and yeah, okay, whew, good. So so now it is the same as what we had. The only difference being, I was duplicating it. And so that's it for replicating all this code, all this HTML now being handled by just this little bit. And of course you would need to again create the same thing for your select and your text area, but you would probably reuse some of this code. You would abstract this out, maybe create a base class. A lot of this stuff is the same, and then just alter it. So but this at least gets you started with creating a tag helper that will take all of this HTML and render it with just this. Now, if we look over at our detail, I'm going to much more quickly create the tag helper that will take this and produce that with a tag helper that looks like this. So we want to have all of this HTML generated by this. So let's get over here and get started. Let's go ahead and create our new class. This will be called the display field tag helper. And this time we're just going to derive from the base tag helper. And now I'm going to go ahead and put this into a separate class and go ahead and open that. There we go. And the reason that I'm deriving from tag helper instead of input tag helper is because we don't want all the noise that comes with generating an HTML input and the data val and all those different things that are going to come with rendering an HTML input. So we're going to just go with the base tag helper, but we are still going to want to support our ASP4. So I'm going to show you how you can do that even if you're not deriving from the input tag helper. And another thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to be able to render out the actual value just by having our ASP4. So we're going to tackle all that right now. Let's go ahead and start with our constructor. We need to bring our HTML generator in. And since we don't have a base like we did before, because the tag helper base doesn't have that, we will need to go ahead and bring this in and keep track of it ourselves, unlike the input. And there are a couple of other things we're going to want, and I know what they are by looking at the code for the input tag helper, so I can know how to support this ASP4. And one of the things we're going to need is our view context. So we will just bring that guy in. So it looks like, you know, you can just inject this like that. And then the same thing for, well, not the same thing, but the attribute, the 4. So this will give us our ASP4. You might notice that, well, this is only named 4. Instead of ASP-4, and we want it to be consistent. So we're going to attribute name, and we will make it ASP-4. That way, when we are writing our HTML, we can use ASP4 and it'll work just like we always expected it to. So with this, bringing this model expression in, we can replicate the behind the scenes work that we get from this. So we're bringing these properties in, and now we can override our process so we can get to work. First thing, we need to, because we're deriving from tag helper, we need to tell it what type of element we're going to render. Let's get some of this noise out of the way. It's a lot going on here. Okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. The main thing we're going to be rendering is our span. So we will say that our tag name is going to be a span, and we are going to want this to be both open and close. So tag mode will be start and end, so that we get our nice span. And then what we want to go inside of the span, we can tell it what we want to go in there by doing output.content. So this would be the content of the base element, which is our span, and we can just tell it to set the content to really anything we want. But you know, this is a generic tag helper. We don't know what it is. It needs to be the value of our model, and we can get that off of our 4. So we brought our 4 model expression in. Where's 4? 4 is right here. So we can do this.4.model explorer, and what they have is a get simple display text. So this will evaluate this ASP4 job name and you know, give us the value. So we'll do our simple display text, and then we'll set that as the content. And let's make sure that the very basic work that we've done so far is working. So we're going to save this and run it, and we'll go over to the detail page, and I'm going to actually kill all this other stuff here so that we can see what we got going on here. I'm just going to delete everything else, and I'm going to put an HR rule here so that yeah. Now let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we have our original one and we have our new one, and we can already see that the value of our job name is being printed, and that's really as far as we've gotten. So if we look at our HTML here, we should just have a span with the value. So span, and it's just got the value, and then those other attributes we haven't handled, so they are just being printed directly on there. Again, we want to be able to say, well, what's the label name, and we also want to be able to apply some CSS to the outer div, not the span in the middle. But good start so far. What we really want is, since we're going to be specifying this, we just need an outer div. So we have our outer div. We want to be able to bring the CSS in so that we can customize it. We actually could just go ahead and put this in, but what I was thinking of with this display field is I may not always want it to have a border and look in a call. I might just want it to be plain. So that's the reason that I exposed it like this. So we're just going to go ahead and do the same thing. So we will add a container CSS property, and what we'll do is we'll just put that right in here. So class equals, and we're just going to make it very nasty. We're going to get as hacky nasty as we can. We're just going to straight put this in here. So we're going to render a div. The CSS for it is going to be anything that we've put in the container CSS. Again, we can't just do this because, you know, anything we put here is going to go on the span right there, and that's not what we're trying to accomplish here. We're trying to actually add something to the outer div. So we got that. Let's start our flex. And the last thing we need to do is render our label. And actually looking at our HTML, this goes up here before the content. And now let's do our label. And we'll do our label the same way we did it for our input. All we need to do is write this out. And let's see, the label, yeah, it goes before. So pre-label. Okay, so did I get this right? We'll start our flex, which is this guy. We will write our label, which is this guy, and then we'll close it, which is this guy. Okay. He's not happy about my 4 here. Oh. I don't think that it wants 4. I think that it wants the Explorer, the Model Explorer. So 4.Model Explorer. All right. Now, you can see that like before we had our label text, so let's just go ahead and create a prop for that. Oops, label text, and that's going to be a string. And that's what we'll put right here. So if we choose to override it, label text, again, I just don't know. Alrighty. I think that should do it. Oh no, wait, we need to add these attributes here. So interesting. Okay, so we've generated our label. What we can do is here, before we actually write it out, we can take our label, and it is a tag builder itself, which means that we can use some helper methods like add CSS class, and this will add it to this label that's been generated. And the CSS that we want is this guy right here. So I believe that's going to do it. No, I definitely broke something. I can see here that I have my label, and let's see how it's supposed to look. Deflex label, deflex label. Oh, my span is inside of here, inside of the flex. What did I do? Oh, there's why. This is what happens every time I'm writing a tag helper. So this is actually pre-element, because this ending of the deflex happens beforehand. And see, this is why this can be a little bit misleading, because this is where we are this is where we're setting our content. But let's remember, this isn't writing it out. When all this is done, it's going to be written out. So the actual order of this isn't going to matter. What really matters is, are you telling it to write it before the content, or are you telling it to write it after the content? And that can be tricky sometimes, at least for me in my head. I like to look at this and think, oh, this is where the span is actually going to going to be printed as if it's very linear, but it's not. So anyway, that's how I messed that up. And so now when we look back, hopefully, yeah, now it looks good. We are having some padding issues. Look like, is there something that I can see here? PB. Oh, well, this one is not wrapped in a row. I wonder if that's the difference there. Yep, there we go. Okay, so now they look identical. And then, of course, if you were just to keep writing more fields, then ultimately you would get a layout that looks like this. And so that was the goal of the display helper. So in closing, what I'll say is tag helpers can be awesome. You can replace all of this HTML with this. That being said, writing code for your HTML is not fun. It's terrible and it's hard to follow. So use it sparingly. Like many other techniques in software development, they can be really great. When you are going to have an application where you have hundreds of data elements and you're going to be duplicating, you're going to duplicate this code literally hundreds of times, that's definitely a good candidate for a tag helper. If you can accomplish it with just basic CSS, that's great, and that's what I would encourage. However, this is not really something you can easily accomplish with just CSS classes. You have to create these inner and outer. You could write JavaScript, and maybe that's a good way to go, but not for me. Not a fan of JavaScript, so that's a whole side kind of discussion. But when you want to take advantage of these ASP4s and you want to generate this outer HTML, a tag helper can get it. Just don't get carried away. They're a little bit nasty. Once you get one written like this, and then you can just reuse it all over your project, and you can end up with HTML that looks like instead of a bunch of HTML like this where every field. That's when you want to use a tag helper. As always, I hope that you found something valuable in here, and maybe the mistakes that I made while I was doing this were similar things that you run into when you're doing them. Maybe those mistakes that I made will also help save you some time. And enjoy the rest of your day.